a fundamental problem, though, of having the narrative just be about the nuclear program of Iran, like this is the pretext for war and bombing Iran again, is that just the hypocrisy, just the glaring
Oh yeah.
hypocrisy, the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and is not a signatory to the NPT, does not
Mm.
allow any IAEA inspections. Whereas, like you were just saying, Iran has been subjected to 7 times the amount of IAEA inspections than average, and they are a signatory to the NPT. They haven't violated anything.
Mm.
And they are being demanded, you're going to say, probably to give up their enriched uranium by a country that is not a signatory to any of these international bodies, doesn't obey the law, actually has nuclear weapons that it's not supposed to have, is making this demand, give up your enriched uranium. And I just think the fact that that's true and more people are going to understand that and realize it, the hypocrisy is just going to become more and more apparent for people, especially if Iran comes back and makes a demand saying like, okay, we will give you up our enriched uranium, but that means Israel has to denuclearize as well. We know that Israel has nuclear weapons. It's in everybody's interest to have a denuclearized Middle East. And I think if they push that narrative out there, I think that's something that everybody can be aware of. Because also
Mm.
people are afraid. We made a video a couple of months ago about the Samson option. And
Mm.
we didn't get a lot of views. And then just recently, I've been seeing that video has been doing better and getting more and more because people are searching for the Samson option. People
Right.
are
Right.
aware of it and they're aware of this threat that Israel poses to the world. So, how do you think this is going to play out for Israel if they try to say give up your enriched uranium? Will that work?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, it won't work. I don't see Iran giving it up. They have been adamant about their completely legal nuclear program for decades now, as they have every right to be. There's a sovereign nation. I think for sovereignty um, is a sacred concept. For the Iranians, it seems like that's really what they're about from the beginning. We will not be a vassal state. We will not bend our knee, to the foreigners. We are a sovereign nation, and so that's part of it. Here we have this program that's entirely legal. Yeah, sure, in theory you could give it up, right? But in giving that up, you're giving up a piece of your sovereignty. And it's like saying, having another country demand, we don't like your railroads. We want you to use highways instead. We don't like this kind of infrastructure. They have no right to do that. If you did it, you say, yeah, maybe we could do better, but we're not going to do that because another country demands it. That's the beginning of the loss of our sovereignty. There will be other demands that follow. So I don't see them doing that. I don't think it's possible that they're going to do that.
Would they do it
Now,
though
just
if they say Israel gives up its nuclear program? Then they'd be the
yeah,
heroes of the world.
yeah, well, that's a possibility. We can see maybe that I think, would be an intelligent response. I think that could be a very effective response. And then just on the glaring double standard, I think it's even greater than that. I mean, I've just been sickened by the statements or lack of statements from the IAEA over this. The IAEA, what it is, the deal is you say, I don't develop nuclear weapons. Our country won't do it. We're going to submit ourselves to the inspections, but with that, we make ourselves legal, and it's all recognized, by this international organization, by the countries of the world, that we have a legal program that deserves, that is protected against law, under law, and it should be protected by this agency. Now, first of all, we have every reason to suspect that IAEA was working very closely with Israel to begin with and may have provided them with a lot of information on nuclear scientists and so on and so forth. But even if, let's just set that aside for now, 14 nuclear scientists were assassinated. These are the people, this is IAEA it's kind of an international professional organization. It's for nuclear science. It's kind of like, the AMA and doctors. On one level, I know it's more than that. But these are their colleagues, and these are people that were engaged. They themselves have demonstrated were engaged in a civilian, peaceful pursuit of this science, which they're the body that oversees this. I never heard one statement, from Grossi about these assassinations, these murders. It was worse than that. Not only did they kill these scientists, but often they killed the scientist and his entire family. I think the last one they killed, it was the scientist. He was a mid-level nuclear scientist too. You know, somebody who's not famous or anything, but he was shared an apartment with his father-in-law, mother-in-law, his wife, and 3 children, and they were all killed together with him. And again, the IAEA never made a statement. They never condemned Israel's attack, you know, which were clearly war crimes, and the sort of thing, again, the IAEA is there to prevent, right? We have monitored these. These are peaceful. These are IAEA monitored facilities. You have attacked them. You know, this is where they have to come out and, you know, do their part. Okay, Iran did their part, right? You know, they've submitted to this very intensive monitoring. IAEA, you know, you do your part. You say you condemn these attacks. They just made some sort of, you know, vague condemnation of attacks in general. They refused to mention Israel by name. But it's like as though there were any doubt. They didn't do it. And I just find that, you know, sickening, really just truly sickening. You know, other countries, I know the Russians in particular, have really gone after the IAEA because they've had their own experiences with them. This is, an institution that is now just a tool, a weapon, you know, of Western hegemony. And that's a very disturbing development, again, because they are a very important part of the NPT regime. And if it's clear that they're corrupted, the NPT is in real trouble.
Right. Yeah, it's just showing that all these, you know, international bodies, you know, we always kind of knew that they were tools of the West, but if anybody had any doubts, now it's made clear, you know, they're all just parts of Western hegemony. And so if they withdraw from the NPT, though, do you think that's something that Iran actually will do? Because if they do that, will that be potentially the pretext, the trigger to start the war again? All of a sudden,
it could be. You know, that's the danger of withdrawing from it. If they make the decision, everyone's always said if they make the decision to go for a bomb, that would be like the first step. Is you withdraw from the NPT.
Right. Well, I mean, if Iran is accusing the IAEA of actually helping Israel assassinate their scientists, and then and also producing this finding a day before the attack to give the pretense, the legitimacy for this sneak attack. It's clear that they don't want IAEA anywhere around their facilities. So if they don't allow them, then does that mean they're out of the NPT? It's like you don't have inspections.
Not quite. Yeah, they have already, you know, I think their parliament, the Iranian political system is very complicated. You know, there are a lot of different kind of overlapping institutions, but they have formally, you know, officially suspended their relationship with the IAEA. They haven't ended, you know, they haven't withdrawn from the NPT, but they have suspended their relationship with the IAEA. And it seems, again, that it would be foolish not to. And then Grossi, the head of the IAEA, is, you know, then he comes out with, a strong statement that they must let us inspect. They must let us know where this enriched uranium is. And he said, yeah, right. You know, why would they allow the IAEA in? I think it's just there almost seems to be a complete lack of, self-awareness even on the part of these people. I think they're just so used to having, kind of this sense of superiority that they kind of expect other countries to grovel, and they seem to be surprised when they don't.
Are you surprised by the lack of condemnation coming from the West? Not talking about the United States, but just Europe in general, when you have such a clear act of aggression that Israel carried out against Iran, in the midst of these negotiations, a sneak attack that targeted not only military leaders, but politicians and scientists, assassinations, terrorism, car bombings. Negotiators. Right. This is what happened. It's like clearly, everybody knows that this isn't okay. You don't do this in war, that this is a very heinous act. I understand the United States and the Zionist control, but I felt like Europe, they would be able to speak out against something like this, including, or just the attacks on the nuclear facilities. Like, we don't want another Chernobyl, right? This is bad. You're
Right.
not supposed to bomb nuclear facilities. Like, this is something we could easily to condemn. Also, the populations within Europe, there isn't a strong Christian Zionist element like there is in the United States. So I just felt like this isn't popular position to be so pro-Israel in Europe as well. But are you surprised that your Europeans, they just kowtow, they just kind of repeat what the United States says, they just offer these blank platitudes,
Right.
they don't do what's in their own interest, like condemn this would make you popular, people understand it's not good for the world, let's don't do this, let's don't bomb nuclear sites.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say I wasn't surprised. I mean, it's just that, the governments, again, not particularly representative of their, respective peoples, but the governments are just thoroughly in line with this. They're very closely, aligned with Israel, and just can reflexively support their actions. We're beginning to get some criticisms of the enforced starvation in Gaza towards the end there, and then that was forgotten. But there was no realignment, let's say. There was really no fundamental change in the support for Zionism among Western governments. So I wasn't surprised by it. There was a little bit of criticism voiced, regarding the attacks on the nuclear facilities. But then, but I think there's really no criticism about the American attack on the 3 nuclear facilities. One thing that it shows too is just like, there was a lot of criticism of Donald Trump prior to that attack. He actually wants to talk to the Russians. This is horrifying, right? So there was all sorts of consternation and protest regarding, Trump's measures towards, well, again, negotiations and possibly peace, peace breaking out, the horror. But then when he goes and attacks, on a completely, without justification, without provocation, on a pretext, he attacks these facilities. There's nothing but praise, and you saw he got a hero's welcome. I mean, it was. I'm sure you maybe saw that message from Rutte that he had sent to Trump. Trump then published it. It was just so sycophantic, and this is what he got. He got that treatment. He got that sycophantic treatment when he went to this NATO summit. Why? Because he was a war president. He had attacked another country. I've told you about what happened during his first term when he attacked Syria. Before that, it was just day in and day out. Everything that Trump said and did was awful, and it was condemned. He used the wrong word here. We opposed this policy there, and it was never ending. But then he attacked. Again, it was on a false pretense. He attacked Syria, and then all of a sudden, we have ourselves. He has now proven himself to be a proper commander in chief. So what can you say, what conclusion can you draw from that? And that is that these people love war. They love war when it's, exercised or it's waged by their leader, the U.S.
Well, I mean, I understand how NATO would love war. It's part of the military-industrial complex. But the political elite, people like Starmer and Macron, Merz, why would they be happy about the U.S. attacking Iran? I mean, if a conflict did start up between Iran and Israel, that the U.S. is going to definitely be pulling out of any support of Ukraine, which seems to be the most important thing for the Europeans. Nothing makes sense. You can always count on the Europeans to root for the wrong thing. That just seems to be true. I just don't understand. It's never not in their interest. Blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Hurrah. This is great. Let's support, anything. They just take the unpopular stance. I just don't understand. Right. Why?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, in the case of Israel, when Israel launches the attack, they just cannot oppose Israel. This is, this is where, this is part of who they are now. Even though, they don't have, there aren't very many Jewish Zionists in Europe, not like, in contrast to the U.S. They're Christian Zionism basically does not exist in Europe. They're not subject to the same forces. Yet, the political elite, that's just part of becoming the political elite. Is supporting Israel. That's part of the kind of the unspoken, you could say maybe even, creed of these people, that we support Israel. That's one line of their creed.
Really?
And yeah, well, I mean, that's what you've seen. Can you find any, real exceptions? That's just
I don't know. It just
I know
seems
it's
weird.
extraordinary, but it is. Of course it is. It's very strange.
Who's cultivating these elite? How do they do it? They just...
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it is actually through the U.S. I think Europe, there's no question. It's not that I think, but Europe 20 years ago was more independent. You think about what happened, for example, during the Iraq War, the lead up to the Iraq War. The French actually opposed it, quite openly and forcefully. And so there we had our freedom fries and all that nonsense, and all those, jokes about cheese-eating surrender monkeys and because the French opposed it, right? Because at that time, Europe was actually semi-independent. And it had been semi-independent, during previous decades too. Like previous chancellors had pursued Ostpolitik, and with an improvement of relations with the Soviet Union, even when it made the Americans nervous because they saw it in their own interest. But really, ever since that first Iraq War, well, I think it's really in great part due to American pressure. America has a lot of levers, to pull in relation to Europe. They have, and over time, the neocons won in Europe. And so now you have leaders, you have establishments, you have governments in Europe that are just, that share the American view of the world, the neocon version of the world. And dissent has disappeared. It's just, it exists in a couple of countries. There are a few opposition parties, but within these governments, it's just of the major countries there, it has disappeared. And that's extraordinary. It's hard, it's hard to just say, well, that's, the Americans did this. There obviously had to be some sort of weakness, within European society, some kind of apathy, a failure to fight back. There are people back then that saw, oh, this is not good. Even people like Merkel, kind of had an understanding that she's kind of a transition figure. She was, she's part of that transition to total subservience. But, initially she thought it was a big mistake, for example, for Ukraine to be brought into NATO, rightly, and others. But all of that was, those protests were weak. They were just overcome by American insistence. There wasn't really a will to independence. Even though they saw that these certain American policies were not in their interest. In the end, they bowed to the Americans, and that's what you have now. You have totally subservient states in Europe.
Do you think that neocon thinking is really deeply entrenched already? Because like you said, it was only 20 years ago where we were doing the freedom fries and all that stuff. It seems like there was some independence. Overall, this is a relatively new phenomenon. Is there a chance that Europe can take their continent back and be like, okay, we are Germans. We have our own foreign policy, and we don't like having wars in the Middle East. We don't want to have, just why?
Right. Well, there is a chance. Sometimes, I'm more hopeful about Europe because you do have, well, first of all, there are some true dissident countries, right? And we have Slovakia and Hungary. Some other
Hungary's
governments
very supportive of Israel, though, I would say.
I know. Well, I was going to get to that. When it comes to Russia and some other policies, right, they are independent. Unfortunately, the great majority of these populist parties are very supportive of Israel. They've made a devil's bargain with Israel. And so if they come to power, if we see the National Rally, come to power in France, actually, the National Rally is, I think, it's so, it's treated with such horror by the establishment that you imagine it must be, really kind of a hardcore party, but it isn't. Under Marine Le Pen, they have made many compromises to the point that there's kind of milquetoast. I don't know that you would even see, some really significant departures if the national rally came into power. I think the off day is a different question. Different matter, I should say, entirely. If they came to power, I think, again, you can be disappointed. You think you're voting for a real change of policy, and then you get the same thing. But I think you would see a real change in policy vis-a-vis Russia, but not, unfortunately, vis-a-vis Israel and the Middle East.